Would you ask Mr. Evans to come back in, please? Thank you. Right, Mr. Evans, you ready to carry on?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Can we please have back up on the screen NHB 402864? This is Nick Jenkins's response to Brian Martin, 17th February, at the foot of page 1 over to page 2, and I read it to you, and I think we had put the question to you, but you hadn't answered by the time we broke for lunch. But looking at it again, if you have page 2, please, there, he asks the questions in the second paragraph. Is it that the certification has been wrongly awarded, thus pointing to a requirement for better informed educated certifying officers, or have they not achieved certification and are thus subject to indemnity policies to cover the risk? Now, the question was, of course, posed to Brian Martin, but are you able to answer it, or were you able to answer it, had it been posed to you?
There was obviously confusion in the industry, which is why this debate was going on. So had that been the case, I can't answer for all building control bodies at all, but certainly in the case of A, you would think that there was a requirement for better informed, educated across the industry to clear up that confusion.
Yes, there's confusion. We've seen that already. It's a slightly different question, though. Nick Jenkins is asking where there are either the certificate's been wrongly awarded or there isn't one, but the insurers are picking up the risk. Now, so far as the NHBC was concerned, which was it? Or was it a bit of both?
As I say, as far as I was aware, we hadn't passed any buildings with ACM with a PE core. So I can't answer that from an NHBC point of view. I can't also speak for any other building control body in terms of whether the certification was been wrongly awarded. They may have had additional information or justification that they felt was okay, if indeed what Nick was saying was true.
But you didn't know one way or the other, did you, whether your BCOs had been wrongly awarding certificates or refusing to do so and leaving it to the indemnity to pick up the risk?
As I said, to the best of my knowledge, NHBC had not passed any buildings with a PE called ACM.
Now then, let's turn to July 2016, 5 months later. You'll remember that on the 7th July 2016, the NHBC held a seminar called Facades to Tall Buildings. Is that right?
That's correct.
And in the months leading up to that seminar, I think it's right that you were involved in the organisation of individuals who would conduct short presentations based on the topic of facades.
Yes.
Yes. And did you contact Brian Martin of DCLG to present a seminar?
I did.
Yes. Let's look at the email chain about that, please. NHB 401325. Page 8 is where I'd like to start with an email from you at the bottom of the chain to Brian Martin. Subject, NHBC seminar on facades to tall buildings. Hi, Brian. NHBC are organising a seminar on the facades to tall buildings, which will focus on the use of combustible materials and routes to demonstrate compliance. Delegates will be formed from senior technical people from major builders involved in constructing tall buildings. The seminar will be held across 2 sessions on Thursday, 7th July 2016, and will be held in our central London offices at Minster Court. I wonder if you'd like to attend and address the audience in respect of the regulatory requirements for facade to tall buildings. Our draft programme is as follows, and then you can see the second bullet point down in red, regulatory requirements relating to the facades of tall buildings, DCLG, 15 minutes. And then other things such as testing procedures, BRE, alternative methods to demonstrate compliance, BCA, factors affecting fire-engineered approaches, XOVA, query, NHBC, technical guidance notes, NHBC, and then Q&A at the end. Now, to paraphrase the next 2 emails in the chain, after you had not received a response from him, I think you contacted Richard Harrell at the DCLG to see if he could chase up the email. He then does that, and the response then comes back to you from Brian Martin on the 20th of June. almost 3 weeks later. That's at page 6. Can we skip to that, please? And he says, towards the bottom of the screen, "Hi, Brian. Sorry for not getting back to you sooner on this. I've been in two minds about this. I'm not entirely happy that some of the assessments or engineering solutions that are being used in the industry meet the objectives of Part B. It's not for me to tell building control bodies what they can or can't accept, but I'm reluctant to be seen to be endorsing something I'm unhappy with. Perhaps I'm worrying unnecessarily, but on balance I think I'll decline your kind offer. Best regards, Brian." Was this the first time that you were aware that the DCLG was not happy with desktop reports and engineering assessments that were being used at that time in industry?
It was the first time that Brian had spoken to me that he wasn't happy with some of the assessments he'd seen, yes.
Right. So you're drawing a distinction between assessments and engineering solutions as a concept.
He talks about some assessments, not all assessments.
He does.
Yes.
He does. Let's see what you say. If you go back to him and you say, "Hi, Brian," if you just scroll up, please, to probably the bottom of page 5. Bottom of page 5, where we see the start of the email in the usual way, and split over onto page 6. This is you coming back to him, copy to Richard Harold. "Hi, Brian, thanks for coming back to me. I'd like to understand a little more in terms of how you feel they don't meet the functional requirements. Our aim at the seminar is to reinforce how builders can demonstrate compliance using BCA GN 18. Perhaps we can have a conversation so that we can put your mind at rest, as I do feel that someone from DCLG setting out the requirements of the regulations will focus the rest of the day. Would you have any time tomorrow to catch up on the phone?" And he then responds to you on the next day, 21st of June, at page 5, and we see that he writes there, "Hi, Steve." See? "Hi, Steve. Not really near a phone until Thursday. I'm comfortable with the principles set out in the BCA guidance note. The 4 options are a matter of fact. I'm a tad concerned that some assessments and engineering solutions are not as robust as they should be. This is why I'm a bit conflicted. Options 3 and 4 are a matter for designers and BCBs." And then in the next email on page 5, by response, you say, "Hi, Brian, could we talk Thursday? What time would be good for you? I could do any time in the morning and after 4 in the afternoon, as I have a funeral to go to. I would be comfortable with you being critical at the seminar in respect of what you would ideally want to see in terms of a robust solution as a pointer for the builders in the room. Are there any NHBC schemes where you feel we may have fell short? I would certainly like to think not, but if you have, I'm keen to understand where you feel we could have done better in terms of a more robust solution." Now, why are you asking if there are NHBC schemes which you think might have fallen short?
I didn't think they'd fell short, but I wanted to see if Brian had any other information that perhaps concerned them.
Now, you conducted a review in the previous year, hadn't you, 2015? Was there nothing in that indicated to you that NHBC schemes had fallen short in respect of some of these assessments and engineered solutions?
So the review of the previous year was to get a benchmark of where those schemes were. I think in reading this email again now, I'm not talking about schemes, I'm talking about the assessments. I think I'm trying to come across here, because Brian's referred to some of the option 3 and 4 assessments. It's perhaps a new, again, I hadn't drafted it quite right, but I think in the context of where I'm saying this, it's where does he think some of the NHBC assessments of schemes have fell short. That's what I was trying to get at.
You had accepted, I think, is this right, by this time, July 2016, assessments, as they're called, where ACM was the rain screen material.
We would have done by this time, yes.
Yes. And you now, as it seems, was interested in knowing whether he thought there were any NHBC schemes where, as you put it, you had fallen short.
I would have expected anybody, if someone from DCLG had come through and said, I have some concerns over some reports that he's seen, I think that anyone would have asked the question, are any of ours in there?
Yes. No, I'm not saying it's not a natural question. but it was a question.
It was, yes.
Why were you asking him that question, given the review that you had yourself performed the previous year?
The review the previous year was not of the escalations that had been carried out or the option 3 assessments. The review the previous year was to identify if there was an assessment needed.
I see. And if you go please to the, excuse me, you go to the response, please, on page 4. He responds to you and he says, hi, Steve. This is now the 23rd of June. Hi, Steve. I'm sorry I missed our slot this morning. I've been looking back over this and the information you sent me on the seminar. You've clearly put some effort into the event. I should make it clear that I have no specific evidence of a problem on one of your sites. I would tell you, I've just grown concerned that some desktop studies, as they've become known, and engineered approaches I've heard about, make me wonder if the right people are doing them sometimes. I know we've had some communication in the past about problems you had with the BBA certificate for a Kingspan product. Again, I only have part of the story, so I guess that makes me nervous. Most of my information, quotes unquotes, comes from building inspectors, public and private sector, who are presented with submissions. Many do not appear to cover important details like window reveals. Maybe it would be better if I do come to your event. I've got an appointment on 7th July, but I should be able to move it. Sadly, there's nobody else in the team that could easily cover this subject matter. I'll get back to you. Brian. Now, Brian Martin's concerns, is this right, as expressed in this email, rather reflected your own, didn't they? Or do they not?
Yes.
Yes. Was the NHBC seminar arranged, at least in part, to try to address the problem of substandard desktop and engineered reports that had become commonplace since the publication of BCI Technical Guidance Note 18?
It was, another it was a seminar that we were organising to try and raise the awareness of it and the processes that needed to be followed and get a consistent message to all of our builders.
What we don't see here, Mr. Evans, is any discussion with Brian Martin or any effort on your part to provoke a discussion with Brian Martin about the concerns that you had, that we've seen reflected in the emails with Booth Murray, about the anomaly of diagram 40 of ADB, 12.7, and the definition of filler. We don't see that in here. Why is that?
I was trying to persuade Brian to come and talk at our seminar, and the reason that we'd asked DCLG to come along, we thought to have to get a profile speaker from DCLG, but also so Brian could, that slot was for DCLG to explain their understanding of the requirements of the building regulations.
Why didn't you spell that out in terms to him and say, look, we've got industry representatives like Booth Murray saying that ACM can't be used above 18 metres, and there's an interesting question about what BCOs are doing. Are they certifying or are they not? Why didn't you ask him to come along and actually address that point head on?
I wanted him to come along. We wanted him to come along to do a presentation on the requirements of the building regulations.
Yes, you see the topic.
What they required, so he could set out that if you look at the structure of the day, it was structured to take those builders in the room through a journey. These are the requirements of the building regulations. These are how you could demonstrate compliance, and a Q&A session. So it was supposed to be structured in that way. It wasn't meant, that the subject that we've covered could well have been covered as part of that presentation. This wasn't a detailed. So I hadn't laid out a detailed synopsis of what we wanted him to cover at this point.
No, and one can see the tenor of the email exchanges, which is that the topic that he seems to have focused upon is the substandard quality of desktops being issued pursuant to option 3 and indeed engineering solutions under option 4, as opposed to resolving the anomaly problem which had given rise to Nick Jenkins's concerns. Now, they may overlap, but they're not the same. My question, I'll try it one more time in a different way. Why didn't you use this opportunity and the upcoming conference to try to persuade Brian Martin to come along and address the question that you had for so long tried to get an answer on from him, but had thus far only obtained oblique responses?
We'd asked Brian to come along and talk about the building regulations as they were at that time. We'd already fed back by this time to the call for evidence for anomalies in ADB, as Brian alluded to in an earlier email exchange. So we'd fed back these the differences in interpretation, if you like, in terms of the regulations. This was about covering on that day the present ADB on what the requirements were. Any changes that were required to that would have been subject to a further review, consultation process, and things like that. So it was very much centred on what the building regulations required at that point in time.
And what the building regulations required at that point in time was that rain screen panels, in your view and the view of others in the industry, important voices, must be materials of limited combustibility. Why not simply ask Brian Martin to come along and spell that out at least, leaving aside the question of alternative routes to compliance?
If you notice on the brief that we'd set out was for Brian, asked to Brian to come along, or someone from DCLG to come along and talk about the present building regulations. Also on the programme there, you'll notice that I'm representing BCA to give a presentation where, as part of that, it would be a very similar presentation to what I gave at the Facades conference earlier in the year, where I would mention as part of that our view was that it was all, so it would have been covered as part of the day.
Yeah.
And if anyone there had asked the question, of course, Brian was there to answer for Q&As as well, if it needed reinforcing from DCLG. It wasn't meant to be a session for DCLG to come and answer questions on why the regulations didn't say this, why the regulations didn't say that. It was meant for DCLG to come out and set out what the regulatory requirements were. He may well have covered that as part of his presentation.
You then arranged to meet Brian Martin, I think, before the seminar.
I did, yes.
Did you do so?
I did.
What did you discuss with him?
I can't remember the exact conversation. We talked about what the intention of the day, very much like we've just done here, in terms of what was the journey that we wanted to take buildings on for the day, who the other presenters were, if we were aware at that time. I think we were still waiting for a confirmation of a couple of presenters. I also talked to him about a guidance note we would shortly be producing as well.
Did you?
I did.
And that is the guidance note entitled Acceptability of Common Wall Constructions Containing Combustible Materials in High-Rise Buildings.
It is, yes.
Can we have that up, please? NHB 6065. Now, I'm going to assume, Mr. Evans, you're familiar with this document.
I am, yes.
Was this the document you discussed with Brian Martin before the meeting?
During that meeting, yes, I discussed this document with him. I didn't have a copy with me. I didn't show him a copy of it. I talked about the document and what it was meant to do.
Right. Did he have a copy of it?
He didn't know.
So you were just telling him about it in general?
Yes.
Who else was present at that meeting?
There was just myself and Brian Martin.
Was it on the 7th of July? Or on a date?
It was before.
Was it specifically arranged?
It was a meeting in our offices in London.
Specifically about his attendance?
It was, yes, yes.
Did you show him a draft of this document?
No.
It's right to think that NHBC launched this guidance note at the seminar, didn't it?
It was, yes.
Did Brian Martin, although you say he didn't see it at the meeting you had with him, did he see it at any time before the launch?
Not before the launch, no. Well, not until the day. It was laid out on people's chairs when they went for lunch and then came back, or went for the break and came back. So he would have seen it before the presentation that launched it, but yes.
Right. During the discussion that you had with him about it, even though you weren't showing him the text of it, did you get any commentary from him, any feedback, any views?
Yeah, I talked about the concept of it, what was the intention of it, and he mentioned that it sounded like a pragmatic solution and almost followed a deemed to comply route. Right.
Who was this note meant for?
It was meant for NHBC builder customers.
Who drafted it?
It was drafted between myself, John Lewis. So John Lewis did the heavy lifting on it in terms of a lot of the text, edited by myself and also by Diane Marshall.
Did you give, or did anybody give John Lewis some specific instructions or an outline template, or at least a direction as to what he should put in it?
I think it was a discussion between the four of us, myself, John Lewis, Diane Marshall, and also Ian Davis.
So was this discussion, did this take place at a meeting, in documents? How did this discussion?
I don't remember where the concept of this document came up from. I know it was we started to discuss it in early May, I think, of that year, but I don't remember a specific date or time where it was, let's do this.
You think early May. Can you remember what prompted the first discussions of what led to this document?
I can't exactly know.
When John Lewis drafted it, you then reviewed it and signed it off, did you?
It went through several iterations of going backwards and forwards, but the final sign-off was with Diane Marshall.
I see. Now, in sum, this note includes 3 appendices, which sets out 3 different types of build-ups, doesn't it?
It does.
And they're build-ups that the NHBC would accept without any BS 8414 testing taking place and without a desktop or a fire engineering report being completed. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Now, the first of those, well, we can look at the bottom right-hand corner, which summarises what I've just put to you, and we can see the 3 appendices. Appendix 1 is brickwork facade, Appendix 2 is timber panelling, and Appendix 3 is aluminium composite panels. Can you see that?
I can, yes.
Yes. Now, we'll come back to this document in a moment. Before we do, can I just take you into your statement, please, at page 102, and look at paragraph 251? Because it is here that we see that you explain the logic behind the guidance note. And you say this: in terms of the basis for the 2016 guidance note, A, NHBC, and in particular John Lewis, had reviewed a number of option 3 desktop assessments. John Lewis had accumulated a huge amount of information and knowledge, assessing a large number of option 3 reports as part of the escalation process. We could identify how these were likely to perform based on those test results. We could take an approach that a wall makeup was deemed to satisfy, quotes unquotes, if it was practically identical to these established wall makeups. In such circumstances, the desktop assessment would not be needed. Initially, we considered producing a separate document for the timber and brickwork makeups. We then decided to combine these and include a section on ACM. Now, you say there we could identify how these were likely to perform based on those test results. When you say these, what are the these that you refer to in that sentence?
These were the tests which were presented within the option 3 report.
How could you identify how something was going or likely to perform in a fire?
So we had a great deal of option 3 reports, which, as it says, were for predominantly or very similar wall types, with fire engineers such as BRE, Exova, were justifying through those test results they were citing in the reports as being compliant.
Were there any BS 8414 test reports, with or without BR 135 classification reports, on large-scale systems which used ACM cladding panels, on the basis of which this guidance could be written?
No, there wasn't.
How come? How come it could be written without such test reports?
So fire engineers were using test reports which had been produced for other materials with Class B panels and other reports, and in their view, they expected aluminium ACM of a minimum requirement, Class B, to perform in similar ways.
So let me just see if I can understand this. What you had when preparing this document was a group of, or a collection of test reports for rain screen panels which were Class B but not ACM, with an extrapolation from that fact that, in their view, ACM would perform the same.
The view of those fire engineers who were submitting those option 3 assessments was on that basis, yes.
Were any of those ACMs with PE core?
No.
No. Now, there hadn't been any large-scale testing of build-ups using ACM panels of any class A1, A2, B, or at all, and I think you accepted that both in your statement and today, didn't the fact that there had never been a BS 8414 test, with or without a BR 135 classification, not itself raise alarm bells with you about the reliability of a desktop study from another kind of material?
I took the view that experienced fire engineers with experience in this area, so the material specialists such as BRE, Exover and others, had examined those outcomes of those tests and were, in their view, satisfied that they could, at that point, say that they were of the view that those systems would work and would perform, likely to perform adequately in a test. I took comfort from the fact also that John Lewis had peer-reviewed those. I was of the view that the fire engineering community that we were accustomed to dealing with was comfortable with that. And I saw no reason at that point that we weren't able to do that.
How could you go from the position we've seen that you had adopted together with Nick Jenkins in January and February of this same year to this guidance note?
As with everything, your understanding develops, and during that intervening period, we'd seen these reports being submitted and going through the escalation process.
Did you ignore the fact that Brian Martin had already raised with you the fact that he was sceptical that a flame retardant, even a flame retardant, ACM panel could pass a large-scale fire test, as we see he'd told Nick Jenkins in his 17th of February 2016 email?
Brian Martin was not a fire engineer. I didn't. First of all, I didn't. But again, I took the view that experienced fire engineers in this area were running to that conclusion. I can only, the best information I had at that time was that.
Right. Well, what test data did you use to identify how small changes in the build-up of a system would change the way it would perform in a fire?
I didn't use that test data. It was used by the fire engineers.
Well, okay, but when you saw what the fire engineers had looked at, did you undertake some kind of assessment, or did you ask John Lewis to undertake some kind of assessment as to whether or not their inference, because that is what a desktop is, was reliable and had a scientific basis?
I asked during conversations, and there were many conversations around this note, in terms of views. John Lewis was confident was of the view that the assessments that had been put forward again by experienced fire engineers, his peers in the industry, had looked at the test data that was available. And yes, it was of limited test data, and we'd always like more test data. It was limited test data, but you have to take a view on the information you have at the time. But the view was that they had provided suitable justification for the use of those various cladding types there, not just ACM, but brickwork, timber, and that we would be in a position where we could produce this guidance note.
How did you reconcile the production of this guidance note with Brian Martin's own expressed scepticism as to the quality of some of the assessments that he'd seen?
Again, the fact that Brian had not raised an issue with an NHBC scheme, and I was confident in our robust escalation process, then I was confident in our view as NHBC, and this was very much NHBC's view.
Yes, I see that, but you were not, because you'd never done a full market survey, was not and could not be confident that all building control officers would subscribe to the NHBC view.
This wasn't for all building control officers. This was for NHBC builder customers and for NHBC surveyors.
Can we agree that even small changes to a build-up could affect fire performance?
We can, and that's why the note says that if you build it in accordance with that specification, you won't be required to submit an option 3 report. But if you move away from it, and the instruction to our surveyors was if the specification that they reviewed, if it didn't replicate that that specification, then they would need to go down an option 3 route.
If, as per John Lewis, the desktop assessments that were coming back from fire engineers and being used by an HBC to sign off projects were all perfectly acceptable, then what was the purpose of the guidance note?
We had feedback from builders that they were experiencing long delays getting desktop assessments. The predominant cladding type we saw was around brickwork. And that's where this, as I recall, it started. I think it started the conversation. But we were asked, and we were receiving a lot of desktop reports, last-minute desktop reports, just prior to filing, because fire engineers were, had lots of these going on. So it was about, was there a way we could make it more efficient for the builders if we could identify a robust construction, which if they were prepared to build to, and these didn't replicate what was in the option 3 assessments. These went over and above what was in the option 3 assessments. So in many ways they were more robust, we thought, than those that were in the option 3 assessments.
Well, can I make sure I've understood what was going on here? Excuse me, you had received a number of option 3, as we call them, assessments.
Yes.
Each of which presumably related to a different external wall build-up.
Yes.
Well, some of them may have been the same.
Yeah, some of them were the same. Some
a range of them.
Yes, a range of them, yes.
And then on the basis of that range of assessments based on that range of different build-ups, you produced some guidance which was, in a sense, an inference derived from that group of assessments.
Yes.
But the nature of the guidance was unlikely to reflect many, perhaps, of the underlying assessments. Is that right?
So, say for example, we'd received, 5 different brickwork facade types.
Yeah.
So varying, maybe different sorts of insulation, varying cavity widths, maybe even varying brick thicknesses or types of. What we were saying was, well, okay, if we look at all those 5, is there a specification that we can pick which is greater than those? Because we're happy with all of those 5. So is there a specification we could do, which we would always say we're happy with, because we've had the option 3 assessments or whatever. So it was always going to be that the fire engineer could justify that. And if we could arrive at a point saying that's the specification, then why not just accept that without the need for an option 3 assessment? In a very similar way, deemed to satisfy is an accepted route under the building regulations, under Regulation 7, fitness for purpose and knowing about it. So in the same way, in very simple terms, if you had a steel beam that goes across an opening carrying a load, an 8x4 beam, if you walked onto 8x4, that's showing my age, an 8x4 150 by 100 beam, you walk onto site and you see that and it's going 1.5 meters carrying a floor load, that's going to work. You don't need a calculation for it.
Well, I was trying to relate this more to the ACM panel problem. And I rather assumed that you'd had a number of option 3 assessments of wall build-ups with different combinations of insulation, rain screen cladding, and cavity barriers or whatever. And using those, you derived from them a proposed build-up, which you would then...
Yes.
Yeah, so it does involve drawing an inference from the underlying assessments, which are themselves drawing inferences from the underlying data.
Yeah, and those inferences were in the option 3 reports that we'd received. Yeah. So there were fire engineers, BRE, Exover, Warrington Fire, who were submitting them. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Yes, Mr. Swindon.
I'm just going to your statement you say we could take an approach, this is the middle of the subparagraph, that a wall makeup was deemed to satisfy if it was practically identical to these established wall makeups. Who made the decision, as you contemplated it, that a wall makeup was practically identical?
John Lewis put forward the proposed specification, and that seemed reasonable to me.
What does practically identical mean? By which I mean, what were the parameters in respect of whether something was practically identical or not?
In terms of the what we saw coming through as those different wall type proposed. So we would draw a similar size cavity, similar size external brickwork, same sort of backing board or a better backing board.
But why practically identical as opposed to identical?
Because again, what we were doing is we had five, using an example of 5 different brickwork scenarios. They all differed. They were all different. So what we've done, when we say practically the same, we're drawing a robust solution, which is a single solution. We're saying if this single solution is probably better than all of those 5, if you follow that one, we wouldn't need an option 3, because if you were to do one, we would accept it. It wouldn't be difficult for your fire engineer to prove it. We wouldn't. We on a review, it's just something we've seen before.
I'm going to stop you because I think you may be misunderstanding my question, and I'm sure it's my fault. I just want to understand what practically means, because once you depart from identical, same, how far from the same would practically allow you to go?
I can't put a figure on that. As I say, John, when we were drafting this, John put forward a specification which he felt was robust and reflected what he'd seen in option 3 reports, what we'd seen with the facade types put through.
Right.
And that seemed reasonable to me.
I see. Now, before you signed off on it, or sent it to Diane Marshall as she signed off on it, did anybody think to send the draft of this out to, for example, Exova or BRE, any independent testing house or UCAS accredited organisation in the United Kingdom, and ask for an independent peer review to check that the guidance you are now putting out would robustly permit compliance with ADB?
No.
Why is that?
We had confidence in what we'd see, and it was us that was making the decision as the building control body and the warranty provider that was a specification that we were happy to accept.
Well, I know that's the result, but what's the reason? I want to know the reason why nobody paused for a moment and said to themselves, if we're going to put out guidance such as this, which collates and makes common a generic wall build-up based on a lot of different extrapolations. So if we're going to put out an extrapolation of an extrapolation, let's at least get somebody independent in the industry robustly to critique it. Now, my question is, that didn't happen, as you've told us. My question is, why not?
It wasn't considered.
Why not?
It wasn't considered. It was a note which was being prepared by NHBC for NHBC builders. It was based on many of the reports which those bodies you've mentioned, BRE, Exova, had already submitted. The fact that they'd already, in their option 3 reports, justified and under, in effect, put their name to those wall types, it never occurred to me that we would need to have that peer reviewed by them.
Now let's go to Appendix 3, please, of this guidance note. Now let's go back to the document itself, NHB 401293. And let's go to page 4. This is the appendix on ACM panels. This is Appendix 3. Let's look at it carefully. Key issues, top left. Similar to cement panels, mineral-cored aluminium composite panels tend to crack and break up under sudden flame impingement. You see that?
I do.
Once burned through, occurs, flames affect both the internal and external faces of the panels, giving the potential for flames to spread via the cavity. For this reason, reliable cavity barriers are necessary, etc. And then if you look down at the second paragraph, that discusses BR135, and underneath that, you can see the first bullet point says that an appropriate measure to meet BR135 is as follows, quotes, the use of minimum Class B, in accordance with BSEN 13501, aluminium composite panels which provide a Class 0 surface spread of flame. You see that?
I do.
Now, that was a change, wasn't it, from the BCA Technical Guidance Note 18 in both issues, which required materials of limited combustibility, so A1 or A2 materials, to be used throughout the external wall construction, including the panels, where over 18 metres.
If you're going down the option 1 route, yes.
Well, you say if you're going down the option 1.
So if you wanted to use a panel, a Class B panel, as we're describing it now, on a wall construction, I would not view that as compliant with option 1. I would view that as you would need to go down the option 3 route to demonstrate compliance.
How do you get to the use of minimum Class B then, here? What's that a reference to?
The minimum Class B for an aluminium ACM panel.
In what context?
It has a classification as a Class B panel.
Yes, and how does that link to the building regulations?
Because you're then going down the option 3 route rather than the linear route. This wasn't meant to... This was, we would accept this construction in lieu of an option 3 assessment. There wasn't, for example, there wasn't a test until after this was produced for brickwork.
I agree.
So potentially, you weren't able to, we were asking for option 3 assessments for brickwork in front of combustible and, in front of combustible insulation. So it was very restrictive in terms of the tests we had at the time.
Well, Class B is not material of limited combustibility.
It's not, no.
No. So here, and we'll come to more of this in a moment, but here you're saying you will accept, because it's common, you say, an external will build up with external panels which meet Class B, not materials of limited combustibility.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, and that's a change, isn't it, from BCA Technical Guidance Note 18?
Going down the option 1 route, yes.
Yes.
And can you tell us where the Class B designation came from? Because I think you said earlier that there were no BS 8414 tests on aluminium composite panels that were available.
And there wasn't at this stage either.
No, so where did the requirement for Class B come from?
So we'd seen a number of option 3 assessments for aluminium ACM panels, Class B rating, through the option 3 route.
Right.
Where the fire engineers had used other test data to demonstrate that they, in their consideration, that would, if it was tested, pass an 8414 test.
Yeah. Thank you.
But not an ACM of Class B?
Not an ACM.
No. So that's the point, isn't it? Here, suddenly, we've got the use of minimum Class B aluminium composite panels. So I ask you, in a variation on the theme of the chairman's, how could a Class B aluminium composite panel be used over 18 metres in the absence of any large-scale testing to BR135 of such panels, and in the absence of any desktop assessment where the assessment involved such panels?
No, we had desktop assessments which had, which involved the use of ACM Class B panels, which were the fire engineers had used other test data from other tests, not from ACM tests, admittedly, but from other tests to demonstrate compliance.
I see.
Do you happen to know, or can you remember, it's probably rather difficult to say, what sort of underlying test data they were using in any cases?
The one that specifically springs to mind is there was a test for a Class B career panel.
What's the nature of that?
It was a manufactured panel. I think it's like a HPL type. I couldn't say off the top of my head at the moment. It wasn't aluminium, but it was a robust Class B panel.
But was not a composite of this sort of construction that ACM is,
No, it wasn't.
and therefore not necessarily going to behave in the same way under fire.
The view of the fire engineers that put those forward, that were examining those constructions and putting forward option 3, was that they would perform similarly.
Right. Yes, thank you. Sorry, Mr. Bennett.
Let's look down at restrictions on use next. The use of polythene or polythene material called aluminium composite panels which do not achieve a minimum Class B combustibility classification fall outside of the scope of this guidance note. Such products are unsuitable for use in high-rise situations. It's also imperative that substitution with a less fire-resistant product doesn't take place on site. Now, you've explained in your witness statement at page 107, paragraph 266, we don't need to see it, I don't think, that polythene is a simple typographical error for polyethylene. Yes?
It is, yes.
That's what you say.
Yes.
And you also say that that would have been obvious to anyone in the industry.
Yes, I think it would be.
Yes. I mean, just a brief side point, but how do you account for that typo in this final published version?
I think, as I say, I think it was word blindness. We reviewed this a number of times.
Right. I mean, it's not a long or complex document. Was it pulled together in a rush?
I don't think it was pulled together in a rush, but there was a number of iterations of the document. Originally, it was intended to be a separate document for each cladding type. I think somewhere along the line, then we decided that we would pull it together into one with appendices for each cladding type, and it just got in there. I'd say it was a drafting error that wasn't picked up.
Now, the restrictions on use, applying as they do, and you say they do, to polyethylene or polyethylene mineral cord aluminium composite panels, apply unless they achieve minimum Class B combustibility classification. That's right, isn't it?
That's right,
Yes. Can you explain why, given what you told us before in your evidence about FR, we suddenly see the emergence of the acceptability of polyethylene, PE?
This isn't an acceptance of PE.
It is, isn't it? It's telling you that unless the PE cord ACM panel achieves Class B minimum, it can't be used.
At this time, we were unaware of any ACM panels, PE cord, and we didn't believe that you could get a Class B classification for an ACM PE cord panel.
Well, that's interesting. Explain the language then. It says, the use of polyethylene or polyethylene mineral cord aluminium composite panels which do not achieve minimum Class B combustibility classification fall outside the scope of this guidance. That means that those which do achieve a minimum Class B combustibility classification fall within it.
It was. I'm aware now that there was at this time, I wasn't aware at the time, there was at this time a aluminium ACM PE cord panel which had a Class B rating. At the time that I was not aware of this, we were not aware of this, NHBC was not aware of this when we were drafting this. It was drafted in such a way, again, it's, unfortunately, in terms of the drafting, you can read it the way I was reading it, with the belief that an aluminium, an ACM with a PE core would not be able to achieve a Class B rating.
Well, let's just break that up a little. First of all, do you accept that what you're restricting here is polyethylene cord ACM panels which don't achieve Class B as a minimum?
It was written in a way, I believed it was written in a way, that would not allow a PE cord ACM panel to be used in accordance with this guidance.
Well, why not simply say restrictions on use, all polyethylene mineral cord aluminium composite panels, full stop?
In hindsight, we could have worded it that way, yes, but that was what it was meant to say, and that's the way that I read it at the time.
I don't understand that. Forgive me. There is all the difference in the world, isn't there, between saying aluminium composite panels with a PE core are outside the scope of this guidance, as opposed to aluminium composite panels which don't achieve Class B are outside the scope of this guidance.
I accept it could have been clearer.
Well, it's radically different, isn't it, the way you're now reading it, or having us read it?
With the benefit of hindsight, it could have been clearer.
But I want to know why you say it's the benefit of hindsight. Presumably, this document was drafted as it was by John Lewis, a fire engineer, reviewed by you, and reviewed a number of times by those senior to you in the NHBC. How could this apparent ambiguity have crept in?
At the time, I read it that it would exclude ACM with a PE core.
But do you see that by referring to minimum Class B combustibility, you are telling your customers that ACM with a polyethylene or polyethylene mineral core is acceptable, provided it achieves minimum Class B? You're letting it in.
My view at the time, as I hadn't seen an ACM panel with a PE core achieve a Class B, my view at the time was, on reading that, there wouldn't be a possibility of an ACM panel with a PE core being used in this case.
So I see. So are we meant to read this as saying, don't come to us with a Class B combustible ACM panel with a polyethylene core because they don't exist? Or in other words, you won't be able to satisfy the minimum Class B with an ACM panel with a polyethylene core because it doesn't exist?
My view was you wouldn't get an ACM panel with a PE core, and that's the way I was reading it. I accept it's badly worded when you look at it now, but the intention at the time was to not allow the use of an ACM with a PE core, because we felt the evidence that I'd seen at the time, although obviously with hindsight we've seen certification for another panel, but that an ACM panel with a PE core would not achieve a Class B. The best Class B panel we had seen, or the lowest, the panels we had seen at the time that achieved a Class B were the FR rated, which had a high mineral content for their core.
Before you released this note, did the NHBC look at in any detail at the ACM PE panels on the market and look at their Euroclass ratings?
No, we didn't.
Why is that?
We looked at our experience of going through of the panels that we had seen and been presented with. The Class B panels we'd seen had always been the FR core panels.
So
the ones we'd seen that had been originally presented as PE cored were Class E, or so we didn't believe that you could achieve at that point a Class B rating for a PE core panels. The ones we had seen with PE core either been presented at first, or I mentioned the scheme yesterday with the PE core isolated place. They were not a Class B. They were worse than a Class B. So it was our belief at the time that you wouldn't be able to achieve a Class B with a PE cored ACM.
But that was your belief, but your belief was based on not having done a survey of the UK market, just looking at the desktops that had come in.
Yes. Well, or the panels that our builders had presented us with.
Yes. And therefore, we can take it, can't we, that you never saw the existence of the Rainabond PE 55, which was said to be Class 0 or Class B equivalent, and had a PE core?
That was correct. We weren't aware of that at that time.
But of course, had you asked Exova or the BRE, they would doubtless have told you of the existence of such material, wouldn't they? Maybe you can't answer that question.
I can't answer that question. Only if they were aware of it as well. Exova, BRE were putting forward their option 3s with Class B ACM panels, so they may also have been unaware. But they were only assessing what was presented to them by their builder customers.
Wouldn't it have been prudent at the time to see exactly what materials were out there on the market before you recommended what was used at over 18 metres, and before you knew what testing had been done on them?
In hindsight, maybe.
Why not pick up the phone to the BBA, Brian Moore, for example, and say, or ask them to provide you with all the current BBA certificates of all ACM PE cord panels on the market?
We didn't do that.
I know, why not?
I say the evidence we had in front of us at the time that we'd derived from our, the desktop assessments we'd seen, this was guidance for our builders of what we would accept. We believed at the time that we were correct in doing this.
Now let's look at the foot of page 1. On the right-hand side of the document, we were there a minute ago, the words say, the following common wall and facade constructions are acceptable to NHBC without the need to provide an option 3 assessment, providing that the design specification and installation meets the minimum specifications set out in the following appendices. And there you have Appendix 3. Now let's go to Appendix 3 and now look at the guidance in light of that paragraph. The guidance says this. Let's look at it closely. Where a building has a floor level exceeding 18 metres from outside ground level, a Class B aluminium composite panel finish is specified, and the builder can demonstrate that the following precautions are incorporated into the specification, design and installation of the facade, NHBC will accept the build-up as meeting requirement B41. Yes?
Yes.
And we know what requirement B41 is. That's the functional requirement, yes?
Yes.
For external flame spread.
No, not for the entire wall construction. It will adequately resist the passage of fire. The building.
Thank you.
That's requirement B41.
Thank you. That's a better articulation than I gave you. From inside to out, double layer of 12.5 minimum plasterboard, and then you have lightweight steel frame internal leaf, and then over the top in the right-hand column, no less than 12 millimetres thick cement particle board of minimum combustibility Class B. Insulation comprising one of Kingspan K15, Celotex RS5000, Extratherm SRRS, drained and vented cavity, aluminium support rails, minimum Class B, aluminium composite material boards with a Class 0 surface spread of flame classification. So this is telling builders and building control officers that an external wall build-up with ACM panels with Class B, so not materials of limited combustibility, together with insulation products, which are not materials of limited combustibility, where there had been no 8414 test for the specific build-up, was acceptable for meeting the functional requirement B4. Now, my question is, how was that possibly consistent with approved document B?
It is consistent with approved document B. We had seen, at this point, we had seen option 3 assessments which, when assessed, were deemed to satisfy requirement B41 via the desktop assessment route. And as I said, we then put a specification in place which we felt, from that evidence we had, we would be willing to accept as demonstrating compliance with B41.
Is this document not rewriting approved document B on the linear route by writing roughshod over 12.7 for insulation, which requires MOLC, material of limited combustibility, and downgrading technical guidance note 18 itself, which says that all elements, including the external facing material, needed to be material of limited combustibility?
No.
How come? How come no?
It's not. So it's not downgrading BCA guidance note 18, because if a fire engineer had come to us at this point with an option 3 assessment for a wall construction which followed that specification, using the appropriate test evidence to justify option 3, we would have accepted it. That's what we're saying here. It's a deemed to satisfy route. We had seen enough. We felt at that time we'd seen enough. We'd always want to see more, but we had seen sufficient to satisfy us desktop assessments which had demonstrated compliance through the option 3 route for makeups which were less robust than this, that we could say for NHBC projects, for building control and for warranty, if you presented that specification, we would be prepared to accept for warranty and building control purposes. And as a building control body, we could make that choice.
The list you've got under the guidance, the way I read it to you, it is no more than a list of products or materials and some dimensions, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah. There's no intimation here of how they should all fit together, what the tolerances are, what the design should be, what the gaps should be, what the closing should be. Is there?
There isn't, no.
And that's radically different from what BS 8414 and BR 135 requires, isn't it? Which requires precise and identical conformity between the system tested and the system used.
If you're going down the 8414 route and using that, yes.
Well, yes, and therefore, this is a way, isn't it, of circumventing, end-running, both the linear route, which requires materials for limited combustibility, and 8414. You've set those at naught and provided a completely new form of regulatory compliance, which bears no and pays no respect to the particular design of the particular facade.
It was using our experience at that time to give guidance to our builders on what we would accept for warranty and for building control purposes, where they were using NHBC.
Where they were using NHBC. Now, I know that for Grenfell Tower that wasn't the case. But if Mr. Hoban, now, and you'll recall, perhaps you won't recall, that the 7th of July was the day on which Mr. Hoban applied his signature to the document of practical completion for Grenfell Tower. It's entirely possible that he might have looked at this, ticked off Kingspan and Celotex RS 5000, ticked off his minimum Class B, rain screen cladding, and the other things perhaps, and assumed that he was absolutely compliant. Do you accept that?
If he chose to accept this, but this was not for Mr. Holman and LEBC, this was for NHBC.
What difference does that make? Are NHBC's builders permitted greater flexibility, laxity in compliance with the building regulations than a local council-employed building control officer?
No.
No. I wouldn't have thought so. You weren't intending to create a two-tier BCA society, I assume, and therefore the guidance in this could perfectly reasonably, couldn't it, be used by a local authority inspector who was not inspecting for a member builder?
So I'd still expect each one of these would have still been passed in front of one of our surveyors or our project managers to review. So had they had any suspicions or had they had any concerns on the system that it was radically different to the systems they were seeing, so larger gap sizes and things like that, I would have expected them to ask those questions of the builder and maybe sought the guidance from one of our fire engineers.
Well, forgive me, that's completely wrong, isn't it? Because I showed you the first paragraph, or the last paragraph on the first page, which says that provided you've got all these elements in your system, you are deemed to have complied without further questions asked.
You're deemed not to have a need to require to submit an option 3 assessment, but we would still carry out the assessment of the other areas. So in terms of the drained and vented cavity, the standards would, NHBC standards would require minimum dimensions for that. The aluminium support rails would need to be fitted in accordance with the manufacturer. So there would still be other due diligence that would go on in relation to this specification.
Does it come to this, Mr. Evans? By July, or perhaps May, when you started the exercise, 2016, you'd had lots of option 3 desktops, many of which had been done by Exova, in which these products had been used. You identified certain materials and products commonly used in the external wall build-ups, the subject of those desktops, and said that they could be used without either a full-scale test or a desktop study of the actual build-up proposed, or a holistic fire-engineered solution, even though these materials, specifically the insulation and the rain screen cladding panels, were not materials of limited combustibility.
Yes, we were saying we would accept the specification for NHBC building control and NHBC warranty.
Did that not utterly set approved document B at naught?
No, because approved document B is guidance. A builder can demonstrate compliance any other way they choose. That what we as building control, as the building control body are looking at, is does it achieve the functional requirement, i.e. B41. That is the building regulation. And what we're saying here is if you presented this specification, subject to other due diligence in terms of our surveyors and project managers reviewing it for other areas, we would accept that as meeting the functional requirement.
Now, why was there any need for you to come up with this guidance note in July 2016? What was the problem that it was seeking to solve?
As I mentioned before, there were delays in getting specifications from, or not specifications, option 3 assessments from fire engineers where there were, for very similar wall constructions. Where we were comfortable with a specification, why couldn't we present that as a deemed to comply, which would allow our people to actually concentrate on those areas where we weren't so satisfied with the constructions. So we were targeting our time to where we actually felt it was needed.
I mean, in truth, this is actually taking your technical guidance notes from 2014 and 15, putting a line through 1, 2, and 4, and creating essentially a single option where you had these build-ups, namely an extrapolation from a series of extrapolations. In other words, an extrapolation from a series of option 3 desktops.
It was listing a specification which was deemed to satisfy, in our view.
And which part of approved document B do you say supports or justifies this approach?
So Regulation 7 allows the past performance, fitness for purpose route.
But would you accept, Mr. Evans, that there's something of an anomaly here, that on the basis of Appendix 3, you can now justify a build-up which does not have insulation of limited combustibility, does not have cladding panels of limited combustibility. So one's completely bypassed paragraphs 12.5 to 12.7 of ADB.
Yes, I would accept that.
I mean, is it just an anomaly one has to live with, or does it suggest that something's not quite right?
No. What this is saying is we had seen by this point we had seen other justifications through option 3s, which led us at that point to be able to make a decision. We felt as the building control body and the warranty body that we could accept this construction as demonstrating compliance with a functional requirement.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Was this done as a favour to your clients, or from internal pressure or lobbying from industry?
No.
Was this a desperate attempt by the NHBC to give some validity retrospectively to the commonly used wall build-ups which NHBC had been approving?
No.
I want to show you what Adrian Pargeter from Kingspan said. Can we please go to KIN 402297? Second email on page 1, please. It's 8th July 2016, so the day after the conference. Gents, interesting development from NHBC. They've effectively eased the passage of compliance for a selection of combustible insulation brands, K15 included, in 3 select build-ups in high-rise rain screen applications. Overall, I feel this is good news, as it shows a shift in thinking and an acceptance of combustible insulation, and I'm sure is a direct result of our testing and campaigning on this issue. However, the bad and annoying news is that it also allows Celotex and Extratherm, after relatively little effort, to ride in on our shirt tails and will put significant pressure on us in these select applications. Now, I'm not interested terribly much in the last sentence there, but I am interested in the rest of it. He was asked about that email when he gave oral evidence, and I'll show you his evidence, please. Can we have day 85, page 25? I'll just show you what he told us about that. If we go to day 85, page 25, line 9, I ask him, it's not the right reference. Let's pick it up at line 21, where we see the quotation there. Let's go over the page 86. The question at line 9, now did you perceive at the time when you say that you're sure it's a direct result of our testing and campaigning on this issue, that you had had some part to play in the apparent relaxation by the NHBC in their new guidance in July 2016? Answer, yeah. I thought that the evidence that we provided them had helped with their thinking. But also, with the other work that they were doing, we were sure we were involved. And he goes on to explain that that's in part his July 2014 test. Was he right in saying that NHBC had eased the passage of compliance due to Kingspan's lobbying?
No.
So you disagree with him, do you?
I do.
Was he right nonetheless in his email that NHBC had effectively eased the passage of compliance for a selection of combustible insulation brands, among which was K15?
We had presented a specification that we, as NHBC Building Control and NHBC Warranty, would be willing to accept as demonstrating compliance with B41 as the building control body and the warranty body.
Yeah. It was intended to ease the passage of compliance, wasn't it?
It was intended to make it more efficient in terms of if a builder selected that specification, we wouldn't be asking them for an option 3 assessment.
Yes.
Because we'd seen sufficient evidence to demonstrate to us at that time that had an option 3 assessment been put in, we would have accepted it.
Yes, I mean, that's what I'm saying to you. I'm asking you, I'm putting to you, it was easing the passage to compliance because the builder customer would no longer have to go to the trouble and expense of consulting Xover to do a desktop. It would just present a shopping list of these materials to the BCO, and the BCO would sign it off. It's easy.
Subject to other checks and balances.
It is easing the passage of compliance. Will you accept?
I'm sure many of our builder customers wouldn't agree with that because the specification was over and above what they, in some cases, would want to do.
So you don't even agree that your aim here was to ease the passage of compliance for your builder customers?
If they selected that specification, we would not ask them for additional information.
Yes.
They may see that as being more efficient for them, but alongside that, many times they weren't able to use that specification or they would want to do it differently. So in that case, they would have to go down the option 3 route.
Now, given the concerns that you and DCLG had about option 3 desktop study reports, some of which we saw reflected in the exchanges you'd had this very month and the previous month with Brian Martin, were you not concerned yourself that the 2016 guidance note was again encouraging industry to bypass important testing that should have been the remit of experienced and competent professionals?
We weren't saying by publishing this guidance note that we weren't still going to be asking builders for and manufacturers for testing. And that wasn't the case at all. We weren't, there was, at the end of the day, there was only 3 specifications here. It wasn't a case of we will no longer be asking for testing or encouraging industry to do testing. That would still be the case. This was seen as helpful guidance to our builders where they were willing to incorporate this specification on their buildings. We would not ask for additional information to demonstrate compliance. We would be satisfied that for ourselves, for our purposes, NHBC Building Control and NHBC Warranty, that they'd satisfied or they could satisfy the functional requirement B41.
Even now, are you able to tell us whether NHBC had historically accepted Rainer Bond PE on buildings over 18 metres in reliance on a BBA certificate in respect of that product that said it was Class B?
As far as I'm concerned, as far as I'm aware, no.
Are you familiar with the DCLG's 7 tests that were performed after the Grenfell Tower fire?
I am, yes.
And so you're aware that even build-ups using FR ACM panels with PIR or phenolic insulation failed to meet the criteria in BR 135?
I am, yes.
Yeah. Both of which were, of course, acceptable under your 2016 guidance note, weren't they?
They would have been, yes.
Yeah. Now, we've seen that Brian Martin had expressed to Nick Jenkins his doubts about the cause of flame-retardant ACM panels in an email chain which was forwarded to you. We've seen that already. Did you take that into account when issuing the 2016 guidance note?
No, we didn't. We took into account, as I mentioned, the evidence that we'd had provided from builder customers when they were constructing these buildings.
Why didn't you take that into account when considering the builder customer evidence?
I'd taken the view of fire engineers who were experienced in these matters.
Wasn't releasing this guidance note a dangerous thing to do in an industry in respect of which you had already, by this time, harboured serious concerns?
At the time, we felt it wasn't, no.
You see, by this time, the use of combustible materials in high-rise buildings had been referred to variously as a ticking time bomb, Nick Jenkins, an accident waiting to happen, Barbara Lane, John Lewis, and of grave concern, Jenkins again. Why was NHBC, who was well aware of those potential problems, now easing the passage of compliance for combustible materials rather than making things tighter?
I wouldn't, as I said, I wouldn't consider it at that point that we'd eased the passage. We had carried out a great deal of work in satisfying ourselves and gaining information from experts in this area that note was we could justify issuing that note and accepting those constructions.
Are you quite sure, I have to put it to you, that one of the motivations in the NHBC putting forward this 2016 guidance note was not a retrospective curing of the historical legacy overhang of buildings over 18 metres with K15 and ACM on them?
From my perspective, absolutely not.
Now, we touched briefly on your meeting with Brian Martin.
You think we ought to have a break soon?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm so sorry. Yes, of course, now is a good time.
I thought this might be a good time. We'll have the afternoon break at this point, Mr. Evans. We'll come back, please, at 25 to 4. And please don't talk to anyone about your evidence when
Thank you.
they're out of the room.
Thank you.
All right? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Miller. 25 to 4, please. Would you ask Mr. Evans to come back in, please? Thank you. All right, Mr. Evans, ready to go on?
I am, yes.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Miller.
Yes, I now want to ask you about what Stuart Taylor thinks. He was the specialist facade engineer that you met in 2013. Can we please go to his witness statement at WIN 702 at page 45? I'd like to show you paragraph 103 at the bottom of that page. He says this, and he's answering the question, what were your views, or if different, what are your views now on the contents of this note, and that this note is the 2016 Technical Guidance Note, Acceptability of Common Wall Constructions. And he says this, I cannot recall when I first saw this document. My views were that I completely disagreed with its contents. The document generally allowed the use of materials which are not classed as limited combustibility, Class A2 in accordance with EN 13501. For example, the guidance in Appendix 3, aluminium composite panels, allows minimum Class B ACM panels, combustible insulation in the SFS zone, minimum Class B cement particle sheathing board, and K15 or Celotex RS 5000 or extra firm foam insulation in a drained and ventilated cavity. This guidance in no way resembles the guidance in ADB 2 2007. I regarded the document as being quite irresponsible, and I did not know why such a document had been produced, especially after Wintec had spoken to the NHBC in 2013 about the issues of using combustible materials on buildings with a story equal to or greater than 18 metres. Before we get to where he says I regarded the document as being quite irresponsible, do you agree with his summary of what the document allows?
Yes, it's the first time I've seen it, but yes.
Right. He says he regards the document as being quite irresponsible. Do you agree?
No,
Why don't you agree?
for the reasons I've highlighted. We were the building control body. We were the warranty body who were looking to accept this, and that was our choice and our view that we put forward in that note.
Do you stand by this note today?
The note has been withdrawn.
Yes. Do you stand by it?
No.
Why not?
Obviously, seeing the tests for the government tests for ACM that they did after the Grenfell fire caused me to think in terms of the performance of, or the in-use performance testing. So, yeah.
So is the reason you don't stand by it is because what was essentially an extrapolation of an extrapolation or a theory about a theory was shown to be wholly flawed when reproduced in reality?
The note was, I was happy with the note when we issued it, given the information we had at the time. Since the Grenfell fire information I've seen and test results I've seen, I would call into, personally, I would, had I known it with hindsight, if I know now what I know then, I wouldn't have issued that note in the form it was.
What information did you have at the time
So as I've
that has
explained,
been shown to be wrong?
the information that we had at the time was not shown to be wrong, but we have more information now in terms of actual testing of ACM.
So are you saying that the reason you don't stand by this note now is because you now realise that you didn't have the test data that you now have?
The test data we have calls into question the specifications and whatever that were used, yes.
Why didn't the test data that you had then, such as it was, call the very same question into question?
The test data we had at the time, the justifications we had from those fire engineers at the time, our knowledge at the time led us to believe that was a satisfactory specification.
Was Brian Martin present for part of the seminar where you distributed and discussed the 2016 guidance note?
As far as I can recall, he was present for all of it.
Do you recall whether he made any comments or raised any criticisms?
No, he didn't.
Did he say anything about this guidance note one way or the other?
I can't remember if he did on the day, no, sorry.
Did anybody else in attendance say anything about this guidance note one way or the other?
No.
Now, you told us that the guidance note was withdrawn was withdrawn. It was withdrawn, in fact, immediately after the fire, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
And in fact, we can see this through Diane Marshall's witness statement. She told the NHBC Technical Department on the 28th of June 2017 that that guidance had now been withdrawn. Do you know whose decision it was to withdraw that guidance note?
I don't, no.
Were you privy to the discussions which led to the withdrawing of the guidance note?
No.
Now, I want to ask you next about ACM products and the NHBC's review in 2017 after the Grenfell Tower fire. This is something you discuss in your statement at page 110, and on that page, can we please go to paragraph 276? You say at paragraph 276, as far as I'm aware, no system incorporating ACM cladding had been tested to BS 8414 prior to 14th June 2017 and achieved BR 135. We had asked the manufacturers such as Kingspan to carry out this testing, but that had not happened. In terms of whether prior to the 14th of June 2017 there had been an option 3 assessment, i.e. desktop study to BR 135, or option 4 assessment, a fire engineering assessment, incorporating ACM with a PE or otherwise combustible core, A, I'm not aware of any option 3 reports. B, I'm aware that there was an option 4 report where there were small isolated areas of ACM with the PE core. As it was in small areas, dotted across the building, this was deemed to be acceptable by the fire engineer. The report would have come to my attention as part of the escalation process mentioned above. I would have discussed it with John Lewis and the senior manager who signed off the escalation, Diane Marshall or Ian Davis, as part of that process. Now, just pausing there, that was an option 4 report, was it?
It was, yes.
So a holistic fire engineered solution.
Yes.
Do you remember what the project was?
I don't know, I'm afraid not.
Might it have been H&H Barking, Site G?
I don't know.
You don't know. Was that the only occasion on which the NHBC saw a fire engineering report on a project that was using ACM with a PE core?
It's the only one I can recall.
Going on at paragraph 278, you say, other than the above example, to the best of my knowledge, NHBC would not have provided building control, warranty or other services for buildings over 18 metres where the wall makeup included ACM panels with a PE or otherwise combustible core. We would not have accepted a proposal such as this. In terms of establishing this, A, we carried out a 2015 project review, as I describe about at paragraph 150. This covers buildings that were in build at that point. After that point, we adopted the position that the builder must demonstrate compliance with one of the options in the BCA guidance note and would consider each project using the escalation process. Therefore, if it had ACM panels with a PE core, John Lewis, the fire engineer, would not have accepted it as acceptable. It's not right, is it, that the 2015 review did show that NHBC had provided building control and warranty services for many buildings with ACM?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I'll try it differently. Isn't it correct that, in fact, the 2015 review did show that NHBC had provided building control and warranty services for buildings, a number of buildings, with ACM as the rain screen material?
It identified a number of projects which were in progress where the builder was proposing to use ACM, and they were suitably rag rated to be further examined.
Yes, and let's look into that in a little bit more detail. Can we please go to NHB 403038? This is a spreadsheet There it is. Compiled, we believe, in 2015 and then updated later as a live document, which you exhibit as SDE 101. And it's the document we saw earlier, I think,
Yes.
because it's the same exhibit number. And let's look at it again. You've got the tabs showing pre-Jan 2014, post-January 2014, and then the escalations. And the page we're looking at here at the moment is the escalations. Yes?
Yes.
Now, if we go back to, let's start with pre-January 2014. We can see there's the colour coding. And if we look at one or two examples there, let's look at number 17. We'll have to scroll up for that. If we go to number 17, I think we may want, in fact, the next tab. I'm sorry, post 2014. If we go, please, to exhibit, or row number 14. There. Yes, 17. That's it. Orchid Putney, or Orchid Putney Limited 17. And that's code red. Yes.
It is, yes.
So high risk. And let's look at 40 as well. Let's just look at one or two. 40, Higgins Construction. That's given a red. And you can look at the comments under that one on the right-hand side. We should consider the risk as being high due to the use of copper on a timber backing and ACM material for the aluminium rain screen. Please note that an Exover Warrington file report has been commissioned and is present in the file in readiness for the assessment outside this initial review. So that was given a red. Let's look at number 58, Mount Anvil. Also given a red. This project would, in my view, constitute a high risk until we know the performance of the ACM rain screen wall build-up. And just to complete the picture, go back to 17, because I didn't put to you the comment, but looking at 17. Blocks B and D appear most affected, aluminium rain screen cladding fixed to concrete wall with K15 in cavity. And again, given a code red, yes?
Yes.
And we can see here, and these are just examples, that there are references here to ACM, but no details of exactly what the cladding product is that's been used and whether or not it's PE. Why is that?
Because this was the initial review of the review team. This would then have been would have been in red, so the condition would have been applied. The builder would have been approached to provide further information. They would have provided that information, and then that would have been, if John had reviewed that, peer reviewed that internally, been satisfied with that, it would have been passed through for escalation to myself and then on to Diane to have the condition cleared.
Right, so was that information actually gathered, even though we don't see it on this document?
Yes, if that building was subsequently signed off, then yes, it would have needed that process to be completed in order to have been finalled for, sorry, is this building control and warranty? 17, sorry, I'm just checking if it's warranty and building control. I believe that one's just warranty only, I believe.
Right. And is it your evidence that none of these was ACM with a PE or otherwise combustible core?
Again, as part of those comments in column A1 were the initial comments of that review group. That wasn't the signing off of that. That wasn't the end of the process. That was the initial review we carried out in 2015 when we RAG rated these projects.
Right.
That's the initial view of that review team. So John Lewis, Phil Pettinger, Dave Alexander-White and Gary Jarvis.
Can we just scroll to the right-hand side of this? Move the cursor along to the right and see what the last column is. The last column is up-to-date comments, isn't it?
I believe so, yes.
And just looking at, if we scroll down, I think we can still see the column numbers. Look at 17. We can't. Yes, it's still red. You've got blocks B and D, which were the most affected with aluminium rain screen, but in the red writing there, you can see they'd been downgraded to low risk in, it looks like November 2015 and February 2016. Yes?
Yes.
Do you know whether they were downgraded to low risk with ACM on them or whether the panel was changed?
I don't know.
Let's try row 40. If we go to the right-hand side of the document, we go down to row 40. Let's see how that turned out. This is Higgins Construction, and if we can scroll to the right-hand side, there's nothing there. If that project had been amended so that the ACA bed had been removed because it was high risk, would you expect to see that noted in this document?
Not necessarily in this document, but it would have been noted in the project file.
Let's try 58, Mount Anvil. Let's scroll down. 58, yes, thank you very much. High risk because of the ACM. Noted capping beam stage. What does that tell us about whether or not this was rejected or accepted?
So at the stage this was last updated, the building was only at capping beam. So it was nowhere near, it was still under construction.
Right. I don't think, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong by you, but I don't think we see anywhere in this document an outcome of this review whereby the project was rejected because it was high risk because of the presence of ACM rain screen.
Not in this document, no. You'd have to dig into the each individual file.
Have you done that?
It would have been done as an iterative process as we've gone through these. So these projects would have been moving through. Noel Pells, who was the project manager on that particular job that you've highlighted there at row 58, would have been in charge. It would have been the project manager coordinating with the builder to get the evidence from them in terms of the option 3 assessment, or indeed have they decided ultimately to change the cladding perhaps, or the insulation, whatever. So, and he would have had to pass it through the escalation process in order for that blocking condition to have been removed. So that blocking condition prevents a building control final certificate or a warranty being offered on that project. So until it's been through the escalation process, that condition would have been applied.
Yes, but we don't see, on this document at least, projects being rejected because they're high risk because of the presence of ACM.
No, they wouldn't have been at that stage, because we still had the opportunity, and part of this, the reason for doing this was to then get at the information from the builder to satisfy ourselves. Just because at the review stage in 2015, it had ACM proposed and it was deemed as high risk or amber risk, we didn't just say, well, we're not going to do it. We then wanted to work with the builder to satisfy ourselves that the builder could demonstrate compliance.
Was it NHBC's policy in respect of post-January 14 buildings, high-rise buildings, to reject ACM altogether or to accept them?
If the builder could demonstrate compliance through one of the routes in BCA Guidance Node 18, we would accept it with ACM, yes.
You would accept it with ACM?
If they could demonstrate compliance through one of the routes on BCA Guidance Node 18, yes.
Well, according to you, the only way that could be done was option 3. And is that what you mean?
Predominantly, it would be option 3 or option 4, yes.
Well, we only have one option 4, as you told me.
Well, we know that they can't go down the with a PE core. They wouldn't be able to go down. They may ACM. There are A2 panels which are ACM panels, which, if then used with a non-combustible insulation, would have actually satisfied option 1 route.
Do you know how many of these projects were using ACM with a PE core?
I don't know.
Can you say?
When this says these were using them, these would have been in various stages of design. So the design may have indicated, and in most of the cases you'll see it has aluminium ACM panels, but it's not known at that time if it's PE cored. Subsequent investigations with the builder may have actually revealed that it was the A2 panel, for example.
Can we go back to the first tab, which is the pre-31st December 2013 spreadsheet, and scroll down? If you scroll down gently, you can see large numbers of code-redded buildings, high-risk buildings, which have a description of the elements of the external facade in them. But many of them don't, in fact, most of them don't contain any detailed identification of the exact materials used. That's right, isn't it? They're pretty generic.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of quickly scanning through, obviously, it's been a while since I've reviewed this spreadsheet, but yes, yeah.
Yes. Now, if we look at the first high-risk development in the first tab at line 6, if we can stop scrolling and go back to line 6, we can see that one, given code red in column AG, is a development by Fraser's Projects Limited. Yes? And you can see that from line 6B,
yes.
Fraser's Projects Limited. And if you go along line 6 to column S, you can see that it's Riverside Quarter Phase 3, Osiers Road, London SW18.
Yes.
See that? Curtain walling with insulation-backed panels, Aluco Bond rain screen, aluminium composite system. You see that there?
I do.
And it's coded red with the word high. What did peer review risk assessment refer to there?
So it would have entailed, because it was pre-31, in order of the insulation, would have been obviously a letter from Kingspan. And for the panels, then it would need to obviously for the remainder of the wall construction would have been checked in accordance with the ADB.
And what did the colour red and the word high refer to?
When the review team looked at this, there was they graded it as high, and then we went through I can't remember the descriptions, but it's within my witness statement. I think we summarised them earlier on. And
we can see the description of the product, a Aluco Bond rain screen aluminium composite system. Do you know, or did you know, or could you have known what type of Aluco Bond rain screen that was?
Not through looking at that description on here, no.
Right.
I'd have to go into the job.
And that would tell you whether it was PE cord or not. Is that right?
I would hope that. I mean, obviously, there we see it's at high and then at low. That would, the escalation that was passed through would have verified that. Yes.
And why is the exact type of Aluco Bond rain screen not noted there?
Because it wasn't known at this time, and that's why that's probably why it's been rated as high at that point.
And where would that information, and also the information about the kind of insulation being used, be held, if not in this spreadsheet?
It would be held in the project file itself. The spreadsheet is just a summary of that. You'd have to dig into the file to find the actual assessments, the letters and things like that. You'd have to dig into the job file for that.
And if you go along to AI, heading column AI, for this project, you can see that it's been given a yellow low.
Yes.
Yes? There are no further details.
No.
As it was coded red originally, was that project escalated?
It would have had to been for the blocking condition to have been cleared, yes.
Yeah. And then if we go to the escalations tab, we can follow it through, I think. If we click on the escalations tab, you can see this building features twice in this spreadsheet. The first is at line 116. You can see it there. Yes?
Yep.
You've got the name of the project at column E, and if you go along, you can see that the date of review in column G, 13th of July, 2016. Yes? You can see that. So that's after your note, after your guidance note. And if you look at column H, the comments column, it says, query the aluminium spandrel areas around windows. And if we go down to line 129, you can see the project appears again in this document, column E, Riverside Quarter Phase 3, and then going along, if you look at column, you can see it's reviewed under column G at 28th of August 2016, and in the column H, containing the comments, it says numerous concerns raised as per referral answer text. Overall, should reach positive outcome. MKF, and that's it. And I think MKF is the other engineer.
Malik Kakuri, yes.
Yeah, Malik Kakuri, and he's the other fire engineer.
Yes.
Now, breaking all that up, and I've shown you a lot to digest, Mr. Evans, but first, what were the numerous concerns referred to there? Do you know?
I don't know.
You wouldn't know off the top of your head, But
No,
we would find that, would we, in the project file?
You'd have to go to the project file, yes.
And what's the referral answer text? What is that?
So that's so when our surveyors or project managers want the particular work to be reviewed by one of our fire engineers, they would put it into what we call a referral. So a package of information which is then sent through to the fire engineer's work queue. And then when the fire engineer has done their work on it, they would put their response to it and they would send that back to the surveyor or to the project manager. So it's an internal management system for tracking that work that goes through the system.
I follow. And what is meant by overall should reach positive outcome?
That was his view. If those concerns had been satisfied, I would interpret that. You'd have to ask Malik, of course, but on first reading that, he's raised numerous concerns, but he feels that the builder is going to be able to respond to those positively.
Now, I don't suppose you know the answer to this, but at least specifically for this project, but in procedural terms, how would that project have changed from red and high risk to yellow and low risk?
So depending when it was done, obviously, prior to the issue of the guidance note, which we talked about, so prior to June 2016, then obviously it would have gone through an escalation process to me and then through to Diane. Following the issue of the NHBC guidance note, we changed the escalation process to allow the fire engineers to respond directly back to the to the project manager or the surveyor if they were satisfied. So it no longer had to go through myself or Diane.
Now, given that this project was coded yellow, does that mean that it was given a low-risk rating and construction recommended to continue? Which is, I think, what you say yellow means.
Ultimately, I'm saying, it would appear that by it going down to yellow, or that particular block, so it could have, those blocks were set, each line in that spreadsheet as a block rather than the whole job. And you've already said this, it appears twice in this spreadsheet, so that would indicate that there's separate blocks on this job. In order for that block to have been downgraded to yellow, it would have had to go through the escalation process.
Right.
And somebody, either myself prior to July 2016, sorry, to be cleared, or ultimately when we changed it, we did modify it later on for the fire engineer to be satisfied and respond positively.
Right.
So the surveyor or the project manager could not just clear that condition on their own. There had to be an audit trail internally for how that was done.
Right. Has the NHBC gone back to the project files after the fire, or gone into the public domain and checked this document, this spreadsheet, against the ultimate outcomes, and to see whether, in fact, ACM, and particularly ACM with a PE core, did end up on any of these buildings, which had originally been marked high risk?
Following the Grenfell fire, we did a review again of the projects in build. Firstly, to gather information to see if any had been constructed using the NHBC guidance note. And I can confirm that none of the projects that were in build that had used that guidance note had actually gone down the ACM route. They were all brickwork. A majority of them were brickwork and a couple of timber. We also went back to all of the projects that were still in build, which had either received option 3 assessments, and we were assessing them, or we'd assessed them and cleared them, and we asked the builders to go back to their fire engineers and to clarify with their fire engineers if they still stood by their report, their findings in their assessments based on the information that we had then in terms of the government testing and things like that.
Now, you say that after the fire, you'd gone back and did a review to see if any had been constructed using the NHBC guidance note. Do you mean the 2016 guidance?
Yes, the 2016 guidance note, yes.
Right, but what about the intervening 2.5 years, 2014 and 2015, which is covered by this spreadsheet? My question was, have you done a review after the Grenfell Tower fire to see if any of these projects, any of these buildings, contain ACM rain screen?
Again, we only looked at projects in build at that stage.
Why is that?
That was a decision that was made by NHBC to only look at projects that are in build.
Yes. What was the basis of that decision? The rationale for it? Can you tell us?
I don't know the rationale. Again, the brief I was given was to look at buildings which were under construction at that time.
A quick Google search brings up a Twitter page. I hesitate to do this to you without showing it to you, but to take it from me, that for Riverside Quarter SW18, it says that Riverside Quarter is 650 flats in 9 buildings, developers Frasers, who've replaced cladding on 4 new buildings at its own cost, and applying for government funds for the 4 older buildings. Do you know anything about that?
I don't know.
No. Why not? Why isn't NHBC equipped to know whether any of these buildings covered in this spreadsheet are actually the subject of cladding removal and an application for funding by the government?
I wouldn't know that. If the builders if the building owners felt that they had a claim, they could make that through our claims department. But I wouldn't know that. I don't work in claims.
The decision to sign off this building with the cladding that it had on it would be something that we would be able to see, would we, in the project file, the NHBC project file?
There should be information within the project file, yes.
Do you know from your own knowledge whether those project files have been disclosed to the inquiry?
I don't know. Not the full project files. I know. I believe that we've compiled a list of the option 3 assessments and things like that. But I don't know if we've disclosed entire project files to the inquiry. I don't know. Sorry.
You didn't read any or ask to see any when preparing your evidence, did you?
I didn't know.
Why is that? Why were you not keen to know whether, in fact, these buildings referred to in this review, updated as it was through to 2016, in fact contained ACM, with or without a PE core?
During my preparation for the inquiry, I didn't feel that was necessary.
Why not? I mean, I put it to you because surely it would be essential to know whether, in fact, the system you had in place to ensure that no ACM, particularly no ACM with a PE core, found its way onto high-rise buildings was robust.
As I say in my statement, I was numerous times in my statement, as far as I'm aware, we haven't built buildings with ACM with a PE core, and I was, as part of my review in preparation for the inquiry, I've been through the process that we followed for our escalation process and detailed that, and I was happy with that process.
Well, let's examine that. Can we go to your statement, please, at page 110, paragraph 279? You say, post-Grenfell building reviews, NHBC carried out a number of actions after the Grenfell Tower fire, including investigating the extent to which NHBC provided building control or warranty services for buildings over 18 metres, which incorporated ACM panels with a PE or otherwise combustible core in their external walls. Now, the first question is, if you had brought in, as we see you did in 2015, new guidance, 2014, and then again in 2015, new guidance which meant that you would not have accepted ACM with a PE core, save as part perhaps of desktops, and you'd reviewed all the projects before that date, why did you need to undertake that review? Surely you would know.
Sorry, could I go back up to the previous page on my statement?
Yes. Can we go back to page 110, please?
Sorry, and then to the next page, sorry. Sorry, can you repeat the question? Sorry,
Yes. If you'd brought it, as we saw, you brought in the technical guidance note 18 in 2014 and revised it in 2015.
Yes.
The effect of that was using the linear route, aluminium composite material panels with a PE core would not and could not have been accepted. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. And therefore, the only way they could have been accepted was presumably an option 3 desktop. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. And you would have seen during the escalation process, surely, any desktop which had included an ACM PE cord range screen cladding build-up.
If there had been one which we proposed to accept, yes.
Yes, and I think you told us earlier that you hadn't seen one.
Not through an option 3 route.
Not through an option 3 route, quite. Therefore, my question is, having done that and having never seen one, what was the point of carrying out this review? You would be confident, wouldn't you, that you had no buildings which had ACM with a PE core on them?
I think a lot of companies after the Grenfell fire did a lot of due diligence.
What were the parameters of your review? Let me be more specific. How far back did NHB search in time?
We searched back, so in terms of the, so in 2017, the first thing we did was to look at any buildings which had used the 2016 guidance note, to do that. And then we looked at projects which were under construction at that time.
I see. So, under construction meaning what, that the initial notice had been filed or had not yet been filed?
Had been filed.
Had been filed, but hadn't yet been processed.
Or had been processed, or was under construction, or hadn't been signed off.
I see. So no certificate of...
We hadn't issued a final certificate on it.
Right, I see. I'm with you.
Yeah.
And what was the earliest date that took you back to?
I don't know. I can't be sure.
Wouldn't have gone very far back, would it? Wouldn't have gone back to 2013.
It depends how long the project took to build. Some buildings can take a very long time to build, but I don't know. Sorry.
But did you specifically focus on seeing whether any pre-31st December 2013 projects had ACM with a PE core on them?
As I say, we didn't revisit any completed projects at that time.
Why not?
My brief was to review projects under construction.
Yes, you see, I know. And this is a consistent theme throughout your evidence, Mr. Evans. And what I really would like to know is why did nobody at the NHBC go back in time and work out what is the universe of high-rise buildings in the built environment signed off by the NHBC which contained ACM, particularly ACM with a PE core on them after Grenfell?
That was a decision that was out of my remit at that time.
Who made that decision?
I don't know who made that decision. It was the decision that was fed down to me following my escalation to back as 2015. The decision that was fed back to me was fed back by Ian Davis and Diane Marshall.
You just told us, and you say it also in paragraph 281 of your statement, which is on the screen, that the first part of the process was to see if there were external wall makeups with ACM given final approval for building control on the basis of the 2016 NHBC guidance notes.
Yes.
And is that because that was your priority, because it was that document which, for the first time, expressly let in ACM, particularly ACM with a PE core, cladding materials?
We that obviously at the time after the test, the government tests, and the results from that, we wanted to ensure or establish if any of the buildings that we had used that 2016 guidance note. Yeah, so it's part of the due diligence we were doing, as all organisations were doing at that time.
Why did you do it?
Because I was asked to do it.
Yeah. That's not... Sorry, let me rephrase the question. Why did the NHBC do it?
Because obviously, we'd been asked questions about the 2016 guidance note. We felt as part of our due diligence we wanted to identify if any of those projects that had used the note had incorporated ACM.
Now, the result of that was a list, wasn't there, which you exhibit at SDE 112 of a small number, you say, of projects using ACM. And there were 4 projects on there, weren't there?
Well, they were identified as they could have used ACM. Yes.
And were those 4 projects that were at some stage on the spreadsheets that we've been looking at?
I don't know. I can't verify that.
Well, you could verify that. You could put one document next to the other.
I haven't done that operation.
Well, why is that?
I haven't. Sorry.
Do you know what type of ACM was used in those projects?
I can't recall on those now.
Do you know why that detail isn't included?
As I say here, there was a small number of cases where it was identified that ACM had been used. On establishing that, John Lewis reviewed those, and none of them had used the ACM, had followed the 2016 guidance note. So they were revisited as part of, we then asked the surveyors or engineers to go back, project managers, to then go back to the original fire engineers or advise the builder to go back to the original fire engineers on those projects to identify if they still stood by their reports.
And if you look at paragraph 283 of your statement, you say, in July to September 2017, we carried out a separate review to revisit projects under construction where the escalation process described above was used to justify materials, and there were no available tests, so the builders' fire engineers were relying on testing of similar materials. Pausing there, what did you mean by the escalation process was used to justify materials?
So these were materials within the wall build-up where there were no available tests. So that could be cladding, it could be whatever was in that wall makeup.
So it's like your earlier answer. When you say no available tests, you mean the builders' fire engineers were relying on testing of what they regarded as similar, analogous materials?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Now, you say that the results of that project are shown in SDE 113, which I think you renamed the 2017 Escalations Review Table. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
Well, let's look at it. NHB 403039, please. And this is a list of 96 projects or so of varying cladding types. I'm just going to wait till it comes up. It's NHB 403039. There it is. And it's got 3 sheets, as you can see from the tabs in the bottom left-hand corner. You can see, if we scroll to the bottom, that there are some 96 projects in all. And again, is it projects or is it buildings?
I don't know. I'd imagine it's projects at this stage.
Yes, it looks like projects.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you know what the date range was that was used to compile this spreadsheet?
I don't know, sorry.
And again, did you use the 2016 guidance note?
So, sorry, this went back to all of the escalations we'd received since our changing policy of 2015, sorry.
I see, so back to March 2015?
Yes.
Right.
If they were still under construction again, yes.
And what were the outcomes of those projects?
Where it was identified that testing, that the report may rely on other testings other than the materials they'd got, again, we asked the builder to go back to their fire engineer and asked them to carry out their due diligence in terms of were they still happy to stand by their report.
And were there any where the NHBC had provided either warranty or building control sign-off where the external wall build-up did not comply with approved document B?
I don't know. This was then delegated down to Brian Stevenson and Keith Evans to see that through.
And did they report to you what their findings were?
They didn't. Shortly after this this project was handed over, I was seconded out for 3-4 days a week onto another project, internal project.
If we look at paragraph 284, you say the other 2017 process was to understand NHBC's potential exposure from claims relating to cladding. This related to claims under Section 4 of NHBC's build mark policy. We looked at all buildings over 18 metres, including those where construction was complete. Neil Jefferson and Ian Davis led discussions with builders who constructed the buildings. If those builders confirmed that they intended to address any potential cladding issues, then from an insurer's point of view, NHBC did not need to consider those as part of its exposure for potential claims. The list of buildings with stories over 18 metres that included ACM in the external wall makeup and that NHBC considered is at SDE 114. Let's go to SDE 114, NHB 403040. called it the Section 4 exposure table. Is that right?
Yes,
And that relates to Section 4 of NHBC's build mark warranty, yes?
it does, yes.
So this table shows the projects which have been insured by NHBC who are likely to make a claim. Is that correct?
It's an examination of where buildings under cover, if they were to result in a claim, what our exposure would be, yes.
I follow. Did the NHBC also provide building control services in respect of these projects, or some of them?
Where there's in column K, where there's a BCJ reference.
I see that. Oh, I see. And we can see that from item 2, first project,
Yeah.
BCJ ref. So that, where we see BCJ ref, that's where there was both warranty and building control approval.
That's the building control job reference, yes, yeah.
I follow.
That would be the case, yeah.
Thank you. Now, if you look at it, we can see there are, in fact, in total, some 27 blocks from a number of projects. Yes?
Yes, yeah.
And they all had ACM on them, yes?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Now, the table doesn't always tell us what type of ACM the blocks had. Why is that?
Because we wouldn't know.
Right. You could find out there, couldn't you, by looking at the project file, no?
Yes, but we wouldn't actually know if that was what was put on the building.
Well, if it was in the project file and it had signed off by the BCO, you would, wouldn't you?
Not necessarily in some cases.
Well, not where perhaps it wasn't.
We weren't present on site all the time when those buildings were being built. This was where it was, we'd identified that there was ACM on the building, and if a claim was made and it was actually discovered that there were difficulties with that cladding type, this was to judge our potential exposure, right, as any reasonable insurance company would do.
Now let's look at the first 7 lines of this table. This is a development called the New Festival Quarter in Linfield, yes?
Yes.
And the developer was Bellway Homes.
Yes.
And you can see that the height is provided. On the screen in front of us, we can see that they're all above 18 metres. So we're looking at high rises, aren't we?
Yes.
And we can also see that there's a cladding comment in the right hand, in column N, ops support cladding comment, terracotta tile, rain screen cladding, aluca bond, metal rain screen cladding, etc., etc. It goes on down the page. Did that project have any PE cord aluminium composite on it?
I don't know from this.
You don't know?
No.
I think it's right, isn't it, that the NHBC agreed to accept a claim to reclad these blocks?
I believe so. I can't be certain if this is this is one of those schemes now.
Right. Let's scroll to the right-hand column, please. At any rate, this is effectively an underwriting assessment of the likelihood of builder claims, failure likelihood, and probability of acceptance of claims. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
And probability claim accepted is given 75% in each case. Yes.
In those cases, yes.
Yes. And if we look at box S21 in this table, if we move back to the left and go down to item 21. If we just go back to the left-hand side, we can see that the project is something called Grange Walk development in Bunton Street in London. Do you remember that development?
I don't know.
Looking at what it says in column S there on the screen, block 19.38 metres tall, ADB 2000 applicable, wall types 1 brickwork with assumed K15 to ground level, low risk, may pass BR135 test based on other K15 and other brickwork tests, therefore low risk green. Okay, and then Trespa Meteon, various colours, no wall type found, but on Fig 3 there are spandrel panels between windows which show the Trespa, the extent of the Trespa at every floor level. I'm not sure you can see this, actually.
No.
On this, I think you have to, and you may not be able to do this on the system, but if you could hover over there, that's it. Thank you. Let's move on. Under item 2, Trespa Meteon, various colours, no wall type found, but on Figure 3 there are spandrel panels between windows which show the Trespa. The extent of Trespa is at every floor level, and given the age of the job, this is probably the Class D variant. Therefore, it is an amber risk. 3.3, Reno Bond PE core. 100mm Kingspan K15 on CP board and SFS plasterboard. It is sufficient at this stage to know that all 4 elevations are clad in the principal cladding material, being PE Reno Bond, as detailed within the specification stored in the out tray. Given that PE Reno Bond is obviously and clearly hazardous to life safety from industry experience, and specifically due to Grenfell, this is a red risk and cannot by any means be made to pass any desktop study. Rockwool cavity barriers location uncertain. Conclusion, red with urgent concerns for life safety. How was it that NHBC approved for building control or warranty a hotel, I think it was, clad in PE ACM Class D high pressure laminate with combustible insulation?
I don't know. I wasn't involved in that project.
Well, no, I'm not suggesting you were, but NHBC had both provided a warranty and building control sign-off. My question is, are you able to explain how?
No.
I want to ask you about New Capital Quay, another development that NHBC accepted a claim on. Now, first, are you familiar with that project?
I am, yes.
Yes. And is that because it has been reported in the media as the largest development in Europe to be affected by the presence of ACM cladding?
It was as a result of us looking at that at NHBC.
Yeah. And you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but it was made up of 11 different blocks with over 900 flats.
It was, yes.
It's an enormous development, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah. Now, it's not in this table. We can't see it here. Why is that? Do you know?
It may be known as, I think it's actually the Greenwich Reach scheme there.
Oh, that's it, is it?
Yeah. We may know it as something different.
Do you know that?
But, well, I don't know. I can't be sure, no. Well, if it had already been subject to a claim,
I can't read it.
It wouldn't be in this table. If we were already dealing with it as a claim,
I see.
we wouldn't have been at the. So this table was put together to, as far as we were able to tell, inform our underwriter, or for our actuarial division, of what could be potential claims that we didn't know about.
Now, let's look at, well, do you know whether NHBC provided building control or warranty services, or both, in respect of the New Capital Quay project?
I believe we provided both.
Yes. And again, you're not able to explain how come.
I'm not, no.
I want to show you another document, NHB 402555. This is a meeting of the NHBC Board of Directors on the 18th of September 2018, after the Grenfell Tower fire by some 15 months. Now, I appreciate you're not on the Board of Directors at the NHBC. You weren't at this meeting. Neil Smith and Diane Marshall were. You'll also notice that at that meeting, there's, as a guest, as the third person there, Carl Stokes. Are you able to explain how and why Carl Stokes? Well, first of all, do you know anybody called Carl Stokes?
I do.
Who is he?
He was our head of IT.
I see. So a different Carl Stokes from the Carl Stokes who was the fire risk assessor at Grenfell Tower?
Yes.
Very good, in which case...
Well, I assume so.
Right.
But being as we had a Carl Stokes who was our head of IT, I'm putting two and two together and coming to that conclusion.
The bad news, Mr. Evans, is that doesn't shorten matters terribly.
Sorry.
If we go to page 4 of this document, we can see heading 4, media scrutiny. There it is. And there's a paragraph there about the media team with support from a PR company. And if we go down to heading number 5, claims, it says, a schedule of claims notified to date relating to ACM cladding is attached at Appendix 1. Of particular note are 5.1, New Capital Quay, validated it on the 9th of July 2018, as it was determined by NHBC's expert that there was evidence of overall non-compliance with Part B at the time of construction. There was an initial flurry of media interest after the announcement, but this died down fairly quickly. Galliard is currently designing a repair scheme and cost estimates, but considering how to settle this claim most effectively, this involves negotiation with Galliard and consideration of what the policy enables us to do. Reaching an agreement is not straightforward due to the restrictions of the policy. Now, just pausing there, do you know, from your knowledge, what the overall non-compliance with Part B was?
I believe there were deficiencies in the cavity barriers and those sort of things around the the scheme.
Right. Now, we know that it was an ACM building. Do you know what type of ACM was on that building? Was it PE? Was it FR?
I couldn't confirm either way.
Do you know what type of insulation? The media reports say phenolic. Do
It
you
was
know?
phenolic, yes.
It was phenolic.
Yeah.
Again, how can you explain the fact that NHBC had signed this building off as being compliant with the building regulations?
I can't.
No. Now, you say that NHBC was responsible for raising the standards of industry, but in fact responsible for signing off the largest ACM PE-clad building project in Europe. Given everything you've told us, how can that have happened?
I don't know the ins and out of why that material is on the building. I'm not familiar with the scheme.
The Centrillion Point, another ACM project there, as you can see. Again, do you know what type of ACM that was?
I don't know.
Again, did NHBC provide warranty or building control services, or both in respect
Again,
to that?
I don't know on what basis that claim was validated.
Right.
You're assuming it says there's evidence of non-compliance with Part B at the time of construction.
And then we've got Bellway on page 6. And several projects listed there. Prospect Place, Quayside and New Festival Quarter, where we see that project. All ACM, weren't they?
I don't know. Again, there's workmanship issues there, so as well. So I don't know I don't know the reasons for validating the claim.
Right. And again, do
Or
you know whether
fully the reasons for validating the claim.
do you know whether NHBC provided warranty or building control services, or both?
I can't be at this point in time. I can't recall. Sorry.
And then, just skipping ahead to the end of the document, Mr. Chairman, I've got very little left. I should just tell you.
Well, I was about to ask you.
I know, fair enough, and it's gone 5:30. Can I just ask you to ask the transcriber whether I'm fit to continue, or she is fit to continue for another 5 minutes?
Well, I was going to ask you how long. You think 5 minutes?
Yes, before the normal break, and then I know there are one or two questions, but I'd rather take those after the break.
Yes. Well, she's very long suffering, but I think she'll go for another 5 minutes. Mr. Evans, you can do another 5 minutes, I hope.
I'd rather conclude if we can today.
Oh, we're going to do that
yes.
in any event. Yes. Don't worry. Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
You go, Mr. Bennett.
Yes, let's just look at the end. I'm grateful, Mr. Chairman, and I'm grateful to the transcriber too. Can we skip ahead to the end of the document? We can see Appendix 1 on the last page, page 8 of 8. The heading is Cladding Claims, Circumstances Movement since 31st March 2018. And we can see a list of developers there in the left-hand side of the table. And the projected provisions as at 30th of September 2018 and 30th of March 2018, and the movement between those two dates in that 6-month period. Is this a table you're familiar with?
No.
You're not?
No.
Let's just take it quickly then, or even more quickly. You can see the grey box on the left has the block details, a list of 18 sites with the developer and the site name and the claim status, you see. We can see that there are some 11 sites in 2018 that had made claims, with a further 7 not yet eliminated. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. And we've seen earlier that a number of sites were found not to have complied with Part B of Approved Document B.
Yes.
In general terms, I mean, are you aware of how many claims have been made against NHBC
I'm
for
not.
non-compliance?
I'm not. No.
You're not. Are you able to explain how it was that NHBC, with the high standards that you've told us about, the changes of policy, the guidance to industry, managed to sign off a number of very large projects made up of thousands of people's homes when they didn't comply with the building regulations?
As I say, NHBC don't build buildings. We're on site for a limited amount of time. It's the builder's responsibility to build in accordance with the building regulations. Our warranty, neither our building control or a warranty is a guarantee that there is no non-compliance in that building. We can't do that. We're not on site all the time.
Now, you told us in your witness statement, paragraph 22, page 7, that the NHBC exists to raise standards and improve the quality of housing. Looking back on it all and looking back at what I've shown you over the last 3 days, would you accept that NHBC signally failed in that purpose?
No, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
No.
Why's that?
We can't guarantee, as I said, we can't guarantee that every building that we've been involved with, whether it be a multi-storey building or a 2 or 3 storey home, will be defect-free. Or that's not what we're there for. It's the builder that builds, and the builder's responsibility to build in accordance with the building regulations. We're not on site all the time, so we cannot guarantee. We can do whatever we can in terms of NHBC standards, in terms of our building control service, to influence as far as we can and raise those standards. But we can't guarantee, and it's not expected that building control is able to guarantee that there won't be non-compliances on site when we sign that off. And that's whether you're a local authority or an approved inspector.
Are you prepared to accept, or is NHB prepared?
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was speaking over you, sorry. You're asking a question.
Do you, speaking as the NHBC, accept that as a result, at least in part, of NHBC's role in the matters we've covered, the built environment has a number of high-rise buildings signed off by NHBC and warranted by NHBC, which do not and never did follow the guidance in approved document B and did not comply with the building regulations?
I can accept that there are, as evidenced by the reviews that building owners have, there's a number of buildings out there, a high number of buildings out there with PE core. As to NHBC's role in that, that's not for me to decide.
Well, I'm asking you to.
I don't think that's for me to decide.
No, well, if you don't want to express an opinion,
I don't want to express an opinion.
Don't think we need to require you to do so. We might draw our own conclusions, however.
That's obviously we want to assist the inquiry as much as we can in coming to its conclusions, and NHBC will learn from the lessons that we've learned and from any lessons that the inquiry concludes as well.
And that takes me to my final question. Looking back on the matters that we've covered over the last 3 days, Mr. Evans, is there anything that you personally would have done differently?
Yes, I would have been more assertive with Kingspan. I do feel that I should have escalated that a lot sooner, seen through that, and obviously evidence from the inquiry has revealed that they weren't just delaying things. In some cases they were lying, and that's a matter for me to look at myself. So yeah, and I would have pressed a lot firmer for more testing at an earlier time.
Mr. Evans, thank you very much. I've come to the end of my prepared questions. I am conscious that there is one question I haven't asked you, or set of questions that I want to revisit. But for the meantime, I'm going to ask the chairman to take the usual break, just to make a review.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm sorry it's not quite over for you, Mr. Evans, because at this stage, when council reaches the end, or thinks he's reached the end of his questions, we have a break to enable him just to check that he hasn't left anything important out, and also to let other people who are following the proceedings from other locations can suggest questions which perhaps we should put to you. So we're going to have a break now. I think 10 minutes should be enough, shouldn't it?
It should be. If I need any more time, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'll come and
Well, I'm sorry to detain you and all the other people who are involved, but we'll break for 10 minutes. We'll come back at 10 to 5, but if more time is required, well, you may find it's a little later than that, but we'll tell you as soon as we're ready.
That's fine.
All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Millett, we'll say 10 to 5. If you need more time, just ask the usher to come.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
Thank you. Would you ask Mr. Evans to come back in, please? Thank you. All right, Mr. Evans, I'm sorry we kept you a little longer than I indicated, but we'll see if there are any more questions for you now. Yes, Mr. Miller.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, one or two. Could you please be shown NHB 402791? This is an email of the 6th of August 2015 and will be when I get the right page number. It's at page 2, and it's from John Lewis to Diane Marshall and you, the subject is K15 used with aluminium facade. Hello both. I attended a meeting with Sotec on Tuesday. They manufacture aluminium, not composite, cladding systems. Their system holds approval when used with rock wool insulation. They also showed me a BS8414 Part 2 test, which used K15 behind a 2mm aluminium finish, which was funded equally between Kingspan, Sotec and another party, I forget who, in 2008. It failed within 15 minutes, with flames coming off the top of the test rig. A few months ago, Sotec got a call from Kingspan telling them that they'd take legal action against them if they released the test report. My problem is that, 1, Kingspan have never mentioned it, 2, Kingspan have been reluctant to our request that they undertake a test using aluminium. 3, we've seen assessments from BRE which are based on the terracotta and Eternit board tests and the results extrapolated to aluminium, with the conclusion that in their view it should perform acceptably when tested to BS8414. Either BRE have ignored or been instructed to ignore the earlier Sotec test, or, as it was some time ago, the current staff are unaware of it. I know our backs are covered by BRE's assessment report, but I still have doubts about how the fire performance of a lightweight metal has been assessed on the basis of an inert inorganic material. And knowing that Kingspan are wanting to cover up tests which they aren't happy to share, I just have the feeling that the use of an aluminium facade in K15 may not be as good as we're led to believe. Happy to elaborate more on Tuesday. That's what he says on the next page. Now, first of all, do you remember receiving that or reading that email?
I don't.
Do you remember having any discussions with Diane Marshall or with John Lewis about the contents of that email?
We are having lots of discussions at the time around this subject.
Right, but do you remember having any specific discussions about this specific email?
Not that I can specifically remember about this email, no.
Do you remember specific discussions in the next week, the following Tuesday?
I don't know, I'm sorry.
Do you know whether any actions were agreed between you, Diane Marshall, and John Lewis, or some of you, on that, and what to do about it?
I don't know, sorry.
Do you remember what you did about it? Did NHBC go to Kingspan and confront them with this?
I don't remember, I'm sorry.
I don't think we've seen any record of your doing that. Do you know why that is?
As I say, I can't recall. I can't recall the specific email. I know it was sent to myself and Diane, but I can't remember the specific email or the discussions that ensued. We were having lots of discussions at that time around this subject.
Now, we know that you'd already done your reviews in 2014 and 15, and they were continuing. But in the light of the warning that you get from Sotec about the failed K15 and aluminium test, are you able to explain why the NHBC went on to publish the NHBC 2016 guidance permitting the use of K15 and ACM in Appendix 3, as we've seen?
As I said, that we felt at that time sufficient option 3 assessments carried out by fire engineers, BRE, Exover, to satisfy ourselves that we were in a position to be able to publish that.
Right. When you pulled that 2016 guidance together, did you go back and look at this email and ask yourself the question, why are we listing ACM as rain screen cladding and K15, given in the real world, when put together, they signally failed an 8414 test, 15 minutes, with flames coming off the top of the test rig?
No, I didn't.
Why is that?
As I say, the process of putting that guidance note together was based on the option 3 reports we had at that time.
Yes, but this is the real world. This is a real world test. ACM with K15, 15-minute failure, flames coming off the top of the rig. Why prefer an extrapolation of a set of extrapolations to a real world test?
I hadn't seen this real world test.
You'd been told about it in this email, though, yes?
But we still hadn't seen that real world test. I'd say that we based our view of what we would accept to satisfy ourselves that the wall facade met a B41 on those option 3 assessments and our internal review of those assessments.
Now, earlier in the year, February 2015, you wrote to Kingspan, NHB 50922. I just want to show you one or two documents and just ask you briefly about them. This is 5th of February 2015, letter to Tony Millichap. Re the use of cool therm K15 range screen board in facades above 18 metres. It's a long letter, and we know the reaction it provokes. It was the one copied to Jean Murter.
Yes.
I think we looked at this earlier in your evidence, in fact. Do you recall?
I do, yes.
Yes. Just remind us, what was the purpose of that letter?
This was to inform Kingspan that we'd be going to our customers, telling them they needed, where they were using combustible materials, that we would be asking for compliant to demonstrate compliance using BCA Guidance Note 18.
Yeah. Can we go to NHB 50934, please? This is a letter from you of the 13th of February, internally, where you're bringing staff up to date. What was the purpose of that email?
That was to update staff in terms of our new policy around combustible insulation, and specifically K15.
Can we go to NHB 401032, please? This is a letter to customers in March 2015.
Yes.
The final text for communication, which we haven't seen during your evidence. What was the purpose of that?
This is to inform our builder customers of the processes with the revised process we are now following.
And how did they respond?
They weren't very pleased in most cases. Led to a lot of difficult conversations.
Now, you also referred in your evidence, I think in an answer to a question from the chairman, when he asked you whether you knew about or could recall any test data for non-ACM Class B panels, and you responded that the one specifically springs to mind is a Class B Korea panel. Is it CAREA?
Yes.
I see. Did you know that was tested with K15 in December 2014 and failed?
And it was also subsequently tested and then passed.
When was that?
I can't remember the exact date, but...
Mr. Chairman, I've come to the end of my questions. I don't see any of the others. And therefore, it simply remains for me, Mr. Evans, to thank you very much for coming to the inquiry and assisting us with our investigations. We're extremely grateful to you. Can I also please express my thanks to the transcriber for sitting 35 minutes beyond the due time, and to you and the panel for allowing me that indulgence.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, Mr. Evans, we finally have reached the end of the experience as far as you're concerned, but it's right that I should thank you on behalf of all 3 members of the panel for coming to give us your evidence. It's been quite a lengthy process, and I suspect not an entirely agreeable one. But you've been generous with your time, and we've learned a lot as a result of hearing from you. So thank you very much indeed, and you're now free to go.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to go to the usher then, please? Well, Mr. Millett, that brings us to the end of the proceedings for today, and it also brings us to the end of the proceedings for 2021, because we're not sitting next week, and in fact we shan't be sitting again until the 24th of January next year. But I'd just like to make it clear that the inquiry's staff and members, including, I may say, the members of the panel, will be back at work early in January to make sure, as far as possible, that good use is made of the intervening period. And I'd just also like to say thank you very much to all those who give us their support in keeping the inquiry running. Many of you are here in the room today, and I include amongst them our loyal supporters, if that's the right word, those who come and attend the inquiry quite regularly and indeed for most of the time, as far as I can see. But particularly I'd like to thank our technical supporters, the stenographer who's done a tremendous job and never complains, even though we keep her late on occasion. Our document manager, who always seems to bring up the documents within seconds of their being asked for. And those who aren't present in the, of course I should mention the ushers and the support staff, but there are others who are not present in the room and who are seen only occasionally. I'm thinking in particular of the technical support staff who inhabit the little room just outside the hearing room and keep all these systems functioning remarkably well, and the security staff and others who keep the building running smoothly. I'm very hopeful that by the time we get to the end of January, the present difficulties with the latest variant of COVID will have resolved themselves, at least to the point when it won't be necessary for us to impose any further restrictions. But we shall keep things under review, and we will take whatever steps we need to take to ensure that we can resume hearings at the end of January. So until then, it only remains for me to wish you all a happy Christmas and a good holiday, and I look forward to seeing most, if not all of you again in January. Thank you very much.